His name was Nandi. At least that is what the archaeologists called him, Shanidar I, a Neanderthal who lived and died in a cave in northern Iraq roughly 60,000 years ago. He was about 40 to 50 years old, ancient for a Neanderthal. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow. He was blind in one eye. He was deaf in one ear. He walked with a limp from a healed leg fracture. His face had been broken and healed. By every measure of survival in the wild, Nandi should have been dead within weeks of his first injury. He was not. He lived for decades. Someone fed him every day. Someone kept him warm. Someone protected him from predators. That someone was almost certainly a Neanderthal woman. This is their story. Everything you were told about Neanderthals is wrong. They were not dumb brutes. They were not failed humans. They were not the club-wielding cavemen of cartoons. They were a parallel humanity who survived ice ages, made art, buried their dead with flowers, and cared for their disabled for decades. And at the center of it all, the women. Stronger than modern athletes, more capable than the textbooks ever admitted. The caregiver's history erased. What did Neanderthals look like? Start by erasing the image in your head. They did not drag women by the hair. They were not hunched over. That image comes from a single skeleton with severe arthritis that was incorrectly reconstructed. Neanderthals walked fully upright. They were shorter than us, about 5'4" on average, but broader, heavier, with barrel chests and dense muscles. Their brains were larger than yours. Their bones were thicker. And the women, they were not the delicate gatherers of museum dioramas. They were built for the Ice Age. If you have watched other videos about Neanderthals, you have seen the timeline. When they lived, where they lived, that they interbred with us, that we carry their DNA. This is not that video. This is about the women, the ones who survived minus 40-degree winters, who gave birth without doctors, who fed the disabled for decades, who made the tools and tanned the hides and ground the ochre for cave paintings, the ones whose bone density exceeded modern Olympic athletes, the ones whose story has never been told. By the time we are done, you will see Neanderthals differently, and you may see yourself differently too. The Old Human, The Forgotten Humans. Episode 4. Neanderthal, Women, the Caregivers, History Erased. Shanidar Cave, Zagros Mountains, Iraqi Kurdistan, the 1950s. Archaeologist Ralph Solecki made a discovery that should have rewritten every textbook. Around a Neanderthal skeleton buried in the cave floor, he found clumps of ancient pollen, flowers. Someone had gathered yarrow, cornflower, groundsel, grape hyacinth, and hollyhock, and placed them on a grave 60,000 years ago. These were not random seeds that blew in on the wind. They were deliberately gathered in clusters around the body. Some of these flowers have medicinal properties. Yarrow stops bleeding. Groundsel reduces inflammation. The person who chose these flowers knew what they were doing. This was not just sentiment, this was care. Informed, deliberate, skilled care. A funeral, a pharmacy, a ritual, all in one. Picture that funeral. A Neanderthal woman gathering flowers, choosing each one carefully, carrying them into the cave, laying them over the body. The community standing around her, men, women, children, someone speaking or singing or simply standing in silence. This was not instinct. This was ceremony. This was grief. This was humanity done by a species we were told was not human. And then, Nandi, Shanidar I. When archaeologists examined his skeleton, they found injuries that should have been impossible to survive. His right arm had been severed above the elbow, likely from a traumatic injury, and then healed completely. He was blind in one eye. The orbit had been crushed and had healed. He was deaf in one ear. A bony growth had closed the canal. He walked with a permanent limp. His face had been broken in multiple places and healed. Let us be very clear about what this means. Nandi could not hunt. He could not gather. He could not make tools. He could not defend himself from predators. Every single one of his injuries alone would have been a death sentence in the wild. Together, they should have been absolutely fatal, and yet he lived to roughly 40 to 50 years of age. Ancient for a Neanderthal. The only explanation is that someone cared for him every day for decades. Who was the caregiver? In hunter-gatherer societies, the primary caregivers for the sick, the elderly, and the disabled are overwhelmingly women. Neanderthal women carried the burden, physically and emotionally. They fed Nandy. They kept him warm through Ice Age winters. They protected him when predators approached. They adjusted his position so he would not develop bed sores. This was not a single act of kindness. This was sustained, long-term care for a severely disabled individual who could contribute nothing to survival. How long did Neanderthals live? Nandy made it to roughly 45. That is not luck. That is love. How strong were Neanderthals? Stronger than you. When scientists analyzed prehistoric women's arm bones, they found density and loading patterns that exceeded modern female rowers who train professionally. Neanderthal women's bones show the same patterns, intensified over lifetimes of hide processing, tool manufacturing, food preparation, and carrying children. Their bodies were their tools. Their bones tell a story of sustained physical demand that no modern life approximates. A Neanderthal woman's daily life was physically extreme, scraping every fiber of flesh from a fresh animal hide, hour after hour, day after day, season after season, stretching the skin, softening it with stone tools and teeth, grinding ochre into pigment, knapping flint into blades, gathering firewood, carrying water, carrying children, doing all of this while pregnant, while nursing, while caring for the injured and the elderly. Their arm bones were not just strong, they were monuments. Pause here. Ask yourself something. How strong were Neanderthal women compared to you? Their arms were stronger than Olympic rowers. Their bones were denser than any modern human. They did a lifetime of physical labor that would break most people in a week. And history called them the weaker sex. What does that say about who wrote the history? Neanderthal children were born into this world of strength. A Neanderthal infant was born more vulnerable than a sapiens infant. The wider birth canal meant babies were delivered at an earlier developmental stage. They needed more care, more protection, more time before they could contribute, and yet they survived because the mothers and grandmothers and aunts and sisters of the group poured everything they had into keeping them alive. Neanderthal children learned by watching and doing. There were no classrooms, no textbooks. A Neanderthal girl watching her mother process a hide, learning the angle of the scraper, the pressure, the rhythm. A boy watching his uncle knap flint, absorbing the technique through his eyes and hands. Neanderthal behavior was not instinct. It was taught. It was culture. It was passed down through generations, and women were the primary transmitters. How big were Neanderthals? Shorter than us. Males averaged about 5'5", females about 5'1", but they were stockier, with wider shoulders, deeper chests, and shorter limbs. This body type conserves heat, essential for Ice Age survival. A Neanderthal was built like a powerlifter, compact, dense, explosively strong. Neanderthal size was not about height. It was about surviving temperatures that would kill you in under an hour. What did Neanderthals look like? Their faces projected forward, a heavy brow ridge over deep-set eyes, a broad nose adapted to warm, cold air before it hit the lungs, a receding chin. Their skulls were longer and lower than ours, with a distinctive bulge at the back called an occipital bun. They had red hair, fair skin, and freckles, some of them anyway, based on the MC1R gene variants found in Neanderthal DNA. They would have stood out in a crowd, but they would have been unmistakably human. Neanderthal facial reconstruction has come a long way from the brutish caveman of early dioramas. Modern reconstructions based on fossil evidence and DNA show faces that are different from ours, but not monstrous. A Neanderthal woman's face would have been strong, broad, with a wide nose and prominent cheekbones. Different, but beautiful, human. Scientists have reconstructed the face of a Neanderthal woman from Shanidar Cave, Shanidar Z. She lived roughly 75,000 years ago. The reconstruction shows a woman with a strong jaw, a broad nose, deep-set eyes, and an expression that is calm and intelligent. She looks like someone you could have a conversation with, someone who could have been your ancestor. And statistically, she probably was. What did Neanderthals sound like? Their hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone in the throat essential for speech, is nearly identical to ours. They had the FOXP2 gene linked to language ability. They could speak, but their voices would have been different, higher pitched, perhaps more nasal due to their larger nasal cavities and different skull shape. A Neanderthal would have sounded like a human with an unusual accent. Not a grunt, not a growl. Speech. How did Neanderthals communicate? With language, but also with their bodies, their faces, their hands. A Neanderthal group working together to bring down a mammoth needed coordination. They needed to share plans, warn of danger, celebrate success. They had the anatomical equipment for speech. They had the social complexity that demands it. They talked, they sang, they told stories. What those stories were, we may never know, but they had them. Neanderthal behavior was not simple. They made sophisticated tools. The Levallois technique required planning, precision, and hundreds of hours of practice. They made jewelry from eagle talons and shells. They painted cave walls with red ochre. They buried their dead with ceremony. They cared for the disabled for decades. These are not the behaviors of brutes. These are the behaviors of people. How did Neanderthals hunt? Up close. Their spears were thrusting weapons, not throwing weapons, designed to be driven into the side of a mammoth or woolly rhino at close range. This required extraordinary strength, courage, and coordination. A Neanderthal hunt was not a chase, it was a confrontation, face-to-face with animals that weighed 6 tons, and the women were part of it, processing the kill, carrying the meat, feeding the group. Here is what separates this video from every other Neanderthal documentary. Most of them tell you about their strength, their tools, their extinction, but they never tell you about the women, the ones whose bones were denser than Olympic athletes, who gave birth in caves with no doctors, who fed the disabled for decades, who buried their dead with flowers. The half of the Neanderthal story that has never been told. How did Neanderthals live? In small groups of 10 to 15, close-knit, interdependent. They moved with the seasons, following migrating herds. They lived in caves and rock shelters, sometimes building simple structures from mammoth bones and hides. They had fire, always. Fire was warmth, protection, cooking, and light. Around the fire, they told stories and made tools and raised children. Everything you associate with human life, they had it. How did Neanderthals survive the Ice Age? With technology, cooperation, and sheer physical adaptation. Sewn fur clothing, fire that never went out, shelters built against the wind. The caloric demands were enormous. A Neanderthal needed 4,000 to 5,000 calories per day. The women made this possible. They processed the hides. They gathered the plants that provided essential nutrients. They kept the children alive through winters that lasted 8 months. Neanderthal burial was deliberate. Bodies were placed in caves, sometimes in fetal positions, sometimes with tools and animal bones beside them. The Shanidar flower burial is the most famous, but there are others across Europe and the Middle East. Neanderthals returned to the same caves to bury their dead, generation after generation. They had cemeteries, they had ritual, they had memory. A Neanderthal family, small, close, dependent on each other for survival in a world that was trying to kill them every day. The mother, strong, capable, teaching her daughter to process hides. The grandmother, if she survived past menopause, helping raise grandchildren, passing on knowledge of plants and seasons and stories. The father, hunting, protecting, but not the lone hero. The family was the unit. not the individual. What is Neanderthal DNA doing in your body? Most people outside Africa carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal genes. Those genes affect your immune system, your hair and skin, your circadian rhythm, your response to viruses. If you have ever had a strong immune response to a flu, you may have a Neanderthal ancestor to thank. Neanderthal DNA in modern humans is not a footnote. It is functional, it is active, it is you. How to tell if you have Neanderthal genes? Commercial DNA tests can now detect Neanderthal ancestry. Common traits linked to Neanderthal DNA include straight, thick hair, a slightly larger nose, certain autoimmune responses, and being a morning person. The circadian rhythm variants came from Neanderthals, who adapted to shorter daylight hours in northern latitudes. If you wake up early and feel productive before sunrise, thank a Neanderthal. What is the difference between Neanderthal and Homo sapien? Neanderthals were shorter, stockier, more muscular. Their brains were larger, averaging 1,600 cubic centimeters versus our 1,350. Their tools were different but equally sophisticated. Their culture was different but equally rich. The real difference was social. Sapiens formed larger groups. We traded across longer distances. We built networks that shared information and resources. Neanderthals were more isolated, and in the end, that isolation may have been what killed them. How did Neanderthals become extinct? Not in one event. Across thousands of years, through climate change, competition with Homo sapiens, low population numbers, and possibly disease. The last Neanderthals lived in Gibraltar roughly 40,000 years ago, a small group clinging to existence as the sapiens wave moved across Europe. What killed the Neanderthals? 1,000 small disadvantages compounding across millennia. A slightly higher infant mortality rate. A slightly smaller social network. A few less calories per day. They did not lose a war. The math just did not work out. How humans beat Neanderthals? We did not beat them. We outnumbered them. We had slightly larger groups. We had dogs. We had grandmothers living past menopause who helped raise grandchildren while their daughters had more children. Across 10,000 years, these tiny advantages added up. The difference between survival and extinction was not intelligence or strength. It was demography. It was connection. It was luck. What if Neanderthals survived? What if you could meet a Neanderthal woman today? She would be shorter than you, broader, stronger. She would have a different face, but her eyes would meet yours with recognition. She would be human. And the question of what rights she would have, that question is not about her, it is about us. Ask yourself if Neanderthals had survived, if they were here now, walking among us, different but undeniably human. What would we do? Would we welcome them, study them, exploit them? How we answer that question is not about prehistory, it is about how we treat anyone who looks different from us, and we have not exactly passed that test. The Forgotten Humans teaches us this: Neanderthal women were not weak, they were not passive, they were not secondary characters. Their bones were denser than Olympic athletes, their arms were stronger than professional rowers. They carried the physical burden of survival and the emotional burden of care for decades, for lifetimes. Everything we assumed about prehistoric women was wrong. 2. Neanderthals were not brutes. They made jewelry. They painted caves. They buried their dead with flowers. They cared for the disabled for decades. They had language, culture, ritual, and love. The story that they were dumb cavemen is a lie told by people who needed to believe they were superior. The evidence was always there. We just refused to see it. 3. They are not gone. If you have ancestry outside Africa, you carry Neanderthal DNA. Their genes still shape your immune system, your sleep patterns, your hair and skin. When you fight off a virus, when you wake before dawn, when you look in the mirror, there is a Neanderthal looking back. They did not go extinct. They became us. What are Neanderthals? A parallel humanity, a different way of being human, stronger than us in some ways, Not lesser, just different. And at the center of their world, the women, the caregivers, the artists, the knowledge keepers, the ones who buried their dead with flowers, the ones who fed the disabled for decades, the ones who survived the Ice Age not despite being women, but because they were human. History erased them. We are putting them back. Next time on The Forgotten Humans, the Neanderthals disappeared, the Denisovans faded into our DNA, the hobbits died out on Flores. But why? What happened to every other human species? Why are we the only ones left? The answer is more surprising and more humbling than anything you have been told. Subscribe. This is The Old Human.